Welcome to Trail Talks, a podcast discussing the opportunities students have with career services. And now, from Utah Tech University, it's Trail Talks.
Hello.
Howdy.
Hello, friends that have come to visit us. It's been a hot minute. The studio had been renovated, I guess, and it's been a long time. And I'm happy to have Andrew Weibert here. He is a counselor. I'm going to let you do more of the introduction for yourself, if that's okay. And then I just have a bunch of questions. I want to learn about your life, your journey, and then also just advice that you have for people going into counseling.
Sure. Introduction for myself. I'm 27. I've got a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and psychology, which I got at Washington State University. Master's degree in clinical psychology I got at Capella online. And yeah, I've worked a lot of different jobs. I've lived in a couple different states. A big part of kind of my career evolution, I guess, was what I call working in the trenches, which is doing the frontline psychology, which isn't glamorous, high burnout, really difficult, but it really builds those fundamental skills you need in order to become a really effective counselor at the master's level.
Okay. So I think it might just be helpful for some of the listeners to understand the differences of counseling pathways. I think there's some people who graduate with maybe a psychology degree or even just any other degree, and they're like, I just want to help people, and they feel stuck because they can't sit down and counsel.
Right.
So kind of what are some of the different routes that people can go into, maybe even to different programs that they can take to kind of start getting into the field, essentially?
Well, in order to help people, you don't necessarily need a master's degree, but to be like a therapist, that talk therapist, you do.
Yeah.
But if you don't want to get a master's degree, but you still want to help, you can always do something in the field of applied behavior analysis, ABA, right? You can become what's called a registered behavior technician, an RBT. And what that does is that most often works with people with autism. But ABA is also really effective for people with traumatic brain injuries and fetal alcohol syndrome. And there's clinics like that all over. They'll train you there, and they'll oftentimes help pay for your training. And that's actually one of those things I did starting out before I decided to get the master's degree. So that's one path if you're not ready to commit to a graduate school, because committing to a graduate program is
a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot, right? To find the right one.
Find the right one, and to be able to financially plan for it. You need to do something in between.
Right.
And you can also do things like working in residential treatment, right? That's more of that frontline psychology too. Even if it doesn't seem like you're doing psychology. Yeah. You're helping people live and, use their executive functioning skills and things like that. But if someone does decide to commit to a counseling program, there are several different routes, right? So there's 3 main master's level and then 2 main doctoral level pathways. So there's in Utah, and in other states, what's a clinical mental health counselor is actually called a licensed professional counselor. So that's what's different in other states, but they're generally equivalent.
Yeah, an LPC versus a CMHC, right?
So a clinical mental health counselor is very focused on individual therapy, but still does things like they can still do couples counseling, right? If you get that continuing ed, they can still do family therapy, right? You can still work in schools, things like that. But it is focused. It is when you think about going into somebody's office, right? That's what that's training you for. And that's often a master's in counseling.
And that's what you have then right now.
Yeah. So I'm what's called an associate clinical mental health counselor, which means I'm, on licensure track. So I'm about probably 2/3 of the way there.
Oh, cool.
Or maybe halfway there at the moment, to getting that full licensure, which it can take years. We can get into that in a little bit.
Yeah.
Right?
It is a process. So
it's a process. And then there's Marriage and family therapy. Marriage and family therapy, again, doesn't mean that you have to just work with couples or families, right? They can do the individual counseling. In fact, probably I would say most MFTs, right, marriage and family therapists, see individuals. That's probably a majority of their caseload a lot of the time.
It's not just couples and
It's
families.
not just couples, and oh boy, hats off to people who work with couples because that can be so difficult, so difficult. So the MFTs do have a lot of good training for working with kids too. I feel like that's a big focus in that pathway is working with children, even though of course that's going to be true in all of them. But I've noticed that the MFTs that I've worked with and interacted with, they often have like a focus towards children, so they might engage more in like sand tray therapy, play therapy, and really get their specialization in that.
Yeah.
And then there's social work, right? So at the master's level, you become a licensed clinical social worker, and we call them LCSWs. So we almost never use the word social work or social worker with our colleagues or anything. It's always an LCSW. They have a lot of, what's the word for it? Variety in what they can do, I suppose. Right? So an LCSW is probably more likely to work in schools, more likely to work in case management and things like that, but still can be an individual therapist, still can see families, still can see couples.
Yeah.
Going the social work route is really, really popular. In fact, I would say that last I saw, more popular than going into the clinical mental health counseling role or route. But truly, if what you're looking to do is to be that one-on-one individual counselor, there's no wrong path.
Yeah.
The programs do teach different things though, right? So if you go the LCSW route, that social work route, you are going to be learning more about like laws and case management and working in that kind of arena.
Lots of policies.
Lots of policies, exactly. Yeah. So many policies, which is really helpful for a lot of the work.
Yes. Well, you need them.
You need them, yeah. But sometimes, depending on the program, isn't as thorough in like the counseling classes that you take.
So are you happy then with you going into CMH? Was that like the best pick for you personally?
I think so. With my specific master's degree, I probably could have gone into any. Except maybe marriage and family, because my master's degree isn't actually in counseling, it's in clinical psychology. So it's a little bit more well-rounded, if I can say it that way. The two doctorate paths are PhD and PsyD. And PsyD is relatively new, and relatively, I think that's what, like 20, 30, 40 years. Like, still, though, compared to doctorates, which are
compared to the
PhDs, right, which have been around forever. PhDs are going to be more during school research focused, and PsyDs are going to be more focused on application. And the big difference between getting the doctorate level and the master's level is that the doctorate level can conduct more assessments. So a lot of people, if you just want to do therapy, the master's level is good enough. That's plenty. That's good. Getting the higher education going the doctorate route is primarily to conduct assessments, because that's what's often needed in locations, and that's what pays more.
Yeah.
That's what makes a lot of the money, is conducting those assessments. Master's level therapists can conduct certain assessments. They're graded like A, B, C or something like that. But the doctorates can do all of it. The PhDs,
it's all
PsyDs,
comprehensive,
right? And that's really important.
And you didn't want to do that.
I find it really boring. So I've helped with doctors conducting like the MMPI, like you're familiar with what that is, right? That's really comprehensive, and a big part of it is helping people understand what the questions are, and then the doctor goes and analyzes the results. Which that's not what I find joy in. I find joy in the dialogue between people, and connection, watching people improve and meet their goals and go from turn into the person they want to be. That evolution, like if you're conducting assessments, you don't get to see that.
Yeah.
And that's the beautiful part, is watching the change.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, let's see. Do you want to share a little bit about, because there are some people who are maybe thinking about doing online. What are the benefits? What did you like about doing online? Do you wish you would have done in person? What was kind of your journey like for doing online, and or maybe even just like how you chose to go down that pathway in the first place? Because you kind of said that you'd gone through this evolution of helping people in the hard crap,
Yeah.
really draining stuff. And so what was that kind of evolution like? How did you enjoy your program? It being an online program, how was that kind of different than maybe what maybe an in-person could be too?
Yeah. So I really enjoyed doing an online program, but part of that comes down to people's individual differences. So if you're going to do an online program, you need to have discipline.
Yeah.
Right? You need to be somebody who's good at studying and teaching themselves, right? I chose online because I needed to work. I couldn't balance going to an in-person class, right? And also working and then moving. I moved from California to Utah in the middle of the program. You can't do that, right? In the middle of COVID.
Yeah.
You can't do that when you have to be in person
Right.
going to a class. But not everybody feels supported enough.
Yeah.
In that kind of way, and they need to be able to have a real person that they see and lock eyes with and connect with.
Yeah.
And online might not work as well for them. So really what it comes down to in an online counseling program is you need to be able to teach yourself at the end of the day.
Biggest thing.
It's the biggest thing because you're going to have your professors there and they'll email you back and forth, but it feels like a distanced relationship, right? So for example, during my program, we would have in-person residencies every once in a while throughout the program. So I would go spend a week. Like one time I went to Jacksonville, one time I went to Virginia, things like that. Especially near the end when they have to be able to see how you perform doing practice therapy.
They need to see if you're good.
Well, they need to say, should we pass this person or not?
Yeah.
Going and meeting the professor, it's like, this guy lives in Chicago and I'm living in Utah. Really nice guy though, really cool. He looked like Mark Ruffalo, but maybe taller. But that's also one of the other things to consider is that you will have to take off like a week to go do things in person because I think every single online program requires some sort of residency like that.
I think so.
It's responsible to do it that way.
It makes sense. I don't know why they wouldn't.
And then there's a little bit of the prestige too. Sometimes that matters to people, right? The fact of the matter is when I tell people I got my master's at Capella University, which is a great university, they taught me everything I needed to know, right? No one's gonna be like, oh wow, as if I went to like Stanford or something,
Right.
Right, and that's if that's what's important to you is prestige and status, then you might not be so happy not being able to use that card, right? But also, I learned the same stuff that somebody who went to like a Stanford went to, right? You have to be able to pass the basic standards, right? And also, when you're licensed, when you're working towards licensure, it doesn't matter where you went to school.
Yeah.
It matters that you know how to follow ethics. It matters that you are capable, right? And that your supervisors, right, the people that you work for and the people that your clients, are happy with you. That's what matters. You're getting the knowledge. It's the same knowledge.
Yeah. Okay. And I kind of want to just talk about a little bit about the skill sets that's needed to be a good counselor. And so what kind of skills do you need to have?
Well, I think the first obvious one is you need to be a good listener, right? But the other thing is you need to be patient because change doesn't happen overnight, right? You have to meet people where they're at. You need to be patient with people backsliding, right? People not listening to you, and you need a lot of emotional resilience. So I'm a trauma therapist. I hear
that's a lot.
You hear the worst things ever, and you have people that yell at you, right?
Yeah.
And they try to make it personal, right? They're angry, they're lashing out. So you have to have that emotional resilience and that patience combined to take it, realize it's not really about you.
Yes.
And then move on and still try to help this person who just cussed you out for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Right? Or somebody who's physically threatened you. Right? And of course, always keep yourself safe.
Right.
but you need to be able to take that and not let it break you. Right. So emotional resilience, and, that can be built up, you doing self-care, mindfulness skills, meditations, right. Getting to know who you are, going to your own counseling. Right. And then one of those skills that I think is really important that I don't hear people talk about a lot is intellectual humility. I really do think it's important to keep yourself humble, understand that even if you're working with a teenager, right? You're no more important or special than they are. And everybody deserves help, right? And so if you can put your ego aside, it makes being cussed out by a 12-year-old that much easier, right? But I really do want to also remind people that patience is probably the key. Got to be able to listen, sure, but you need to be patient.
Yeah. Because it's also, like you said, it's not about you. It's their journey. That's why you're there. I will often, in my career coaching, we'll talk to students too about how this industry is full of a bunch of bleeding hearts. Like, we just care so deeply. And so you kind of speak a little bit more to some of those, maybe even like the trials that you've gone through is from like the burnout. Because this is like there's a lot of burnout, especially in trauma.
Yeah.
So what specific things do you personally do to kind of help you be good?
Well, I do a lot of my own mindfulness and meditation, right?
Okay.
I like to practice what I preach. So all of those like dialectical behavioral therapy skills that I teach, I practice. I have to.
Yeah.
Right? I really enjoy, for example, like I like to go sit out on a porch and just enjoy being in the sun a little bit and just have some time to myself and think, maybe listen to some music and just let my mind drift, right? And be an observer of my thoughts rather than being blended with my thoughts. I will say that burnout was a lot more likely when I was working in some of those bachelor's level psychology jobs. Like being an RBT, when you're working with children with autism, they will bite you.
Yeah.
They will spit in your face.
I don't know how I would deal with that.
And for one thing, you remember they're kids.
Yeah.
Right? They're just kids, and they're mad because you tried to turn off a light and they wanted the light on, so they bit you. It's fine. But you remind yourself that, one, it's not about you.
Yeah.
And I was having this conversation recently with a client who's starting to work in that industry, and she was asking about, okay, what do I do in these situations, right? And it's like, what you kind of do is you take your ego, you take a lot of what you are, and you put it in like a metaphorical backpack, and you leave it by the door when you walk in. And all those parts of you, right, that are insecure or sensitive or self-doubt or like arrogant, whatever.
Yeah.
Right?
Or even triggers that could be happening
triggers, right,
from your clients. Yeah.
Exactly. You leave it at the door, and at the end of the day, you get to pick that backpack back up, and you get to go. Right? You can let that be a part of you. It's about separating yourself just for a minute, right? Just for an hour, just for a couple hours. Man, I do think about I worked in group homes in Vallejo, California. I don't know if you know a lot about Vallejo, California, but I don't. It's not the nicest place in the world.
Okay.
To say the least. It's like a suburb of Oakland.
Okay.
And those kids had been through absolute hell.
Yeah.
They were foster kids. A lot of them had recently come out of juvie, and it was, okay, these kids got arrested, right? They went through juvie. Now they've got nowhere to go, so they went to us, the group homes. And I think hearing some of those stories too, even though they're sad, and even though they're heartbreaking, it also can be inspiring in a way of, okay, this kid has nobody, or the people that he has, right? They hurt this person.
Yeah.
But here I am trying my best to be a source of stability, right? So you can remind yourself that you're doing the right thing. And sometimes that's enough for me when it's a really hard day, when I cannot hear one more story of, any of the traumas you can imagine, right? I'm doing the right thing. I'm here to help. And if no one else will do it, I will do it. And that gives enough of that inspiration and that peace of mind of, okay, I'm going to get back to it tomorrow.
Yeah. Just be in absolute awe of the other person's ability to hold.
Right, or how resilient people
Yeah.
are. I mean, some of these things should break people, but they don't.
Yeah.
They don't,
Yeah.
because we don't break.
Yeah.
We just stumble.
Okay. So there's a lot of maybe listeners right now that are thinking about going down this path. So what kind of advice do you have, whether it's graduation preparation or even just like in the meantime, what kind of skills do they need to develop? Like what kind of advice do you have for people who are looking to either go into this field or who are even enrolled in a program right now, but are still really new?
I really think that the best thing I ever did was do those bachelor's level jobs, right? Go into the trenches and see how it really is, right? It helps build perspective.
Yeah.
You need to build perspective to be an effective counselor. You can read all you want.
It blows my
mind
mind that some people will be like, I'm going into counseling and they'll tell me, I'm like, okay, well, you don't have to answer this question, but have you ever been across from a therapist, a counselor to like be in the chair? And they're like, no.
No, you
like,
should get your own counseling.
Oh no, you've never tried.
Right. How can you do something that you've never experienced, right? But I think getting perspective and some real life experiences does people well. I like what you said, getting your own counseling, working through your own stuff.
Yeah.
Because you will get triggered, right? And you need to have those skills built in order to handle what happens when you're getting activated like that. So get perspective, go to therapy, right? If you want to be a counselor, and in some programs it's required. So if you want to be a psychoanalyst, right, in that PhD route, you have to go through your own psychoanalysis. It's mandatory, which takes forever and it's very expensive, but you're going to be a doctor. It's fine. I think really trying to get that perspective and reading up on it, meet people, make human connections, and practice making connections with people. The number one greatest predictor of therapeutic success is the relationship between the client and the counselor. That's what it is. It's about relationships.
Yeah.
It's about connecting and connection.
That sounds so simple.
It sounds simple. And in a way it is. In a way it is. If you overthink it, you can get in your own way. If you're just realizing this is me and this person in this room, they're looking to borrow some of my knowledge, right? Some of these skills that I already know, right? They're looking for tools. I have tools. But before you know what to give them, you need to know what they need. And to know what they need, you just need to sit down. You need to talk.
Yeah. Listen. Yeah. So I don't know if there's any particular story or experience that you've had that you feel like especially stands out to you that you might want to share with any of the listeners.
Yeah. I do. There's always, ethically, we are going to be careful of like confidentiality and stuff, but I have had permission from this person to share their story. So if it sounds very vague, it has to be.
Yes.
But there's a person that I worked with, and they had suffered some really, really serious trauma about 30 years previously.
Yeah.
Ever since then, they couldn't sleep without nightmares, right? Had to have their door locked and things like that. But they were disabled. They couldn't sleep with their door locked in case there was an emergency, right?
Yeah.
So they were in this constant state of distress. And I had learned a modality called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and it's a way to treat trauma, this deep trauma. This person had been to counseling for 30 years, on and off with different people, right?
Just didn't work over the 30 years.
In a couple of months, you get to see this person come in after we work through a lot of that trauma and just say, I didn't have a nightmare last night. I could leave my door cracked open. I saw whatever, this specific trigger, right? And I didn't react. My heart didn't beat out of my chest. I didn't, hyperventilate. So you see these successes.
Yeah.
Right? Or when you work with a family and it's hard sometimes.
Yeah.
You're going through the stuff, you're trying to mediate and all of this, and it's, frustrating sometimes, and it's exhausting. And then weeks later, they tell you like, you saved our family, right? Or when you have someone who tells you like, look, I didn't tell you, but a couple weeks ago, you're the reason I'm still here. Those wins balance out all of the frustration, all of the burnout.
Yeah. Well, I love that story. Thank you so much, Andrew. And I wish we could talk way more about this too. It's such a passion of mine actually as well. And so I just really appreciate you being here. Is there any last thoughts you have for 5 seconds?
5 seconds? No,
Yep.
I'm all good. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, thanks for coming.
This has been a production from a podcast studio.